When love didn't feel like the promise. Nobody warns you that the moment love finally slips away is often the moment you realize you did everything right. That's the shock. That's the part that rattles a man. Not betrayal, not chaos, but the quiet understanding that effort didn't save you. I remember sitting with that realization feeling hollow. Love didn't look like the promise anymore. It didn't feel warm or safe or rewarding the way I was told it would. Growing up, the message was clear. If you showed up the right way, steady, loyal, emotionally available, love would meet you there. It would stay. So I did exactly that. I stayed when it was uncomfortable. I invested when it cost me. I gave patience when I was tired, and effort when I had nothing left. Somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that love was something you earned by enduring. And still, it faded. Not in a dramatic blow-up. No screaming, no slammed doors. Just distance. Replies got shorter. Touch grew colder. A subtle sense that something essential had died while I was doing everything I thought a good man was supposed to do. That's what messes with you. You weren't careless. You weren't cruel. You weren't absent. You were there. Fully. So the question starts to echo in your head late at night. How does love fall apart when you're doing everything right? That question isn't harmless. It cracks something open. Because once you start asking it honestly, you're no longer chasing comfort. You're stepping into the body of the truth. The story we were taught to believe. After that first realization settles in, you start looking backward. Not with anger, but with clarity. You begin to see that what most of us called love was never something we discovered on our own. It was handed to us. A clean, polished story repeated so often it stopped sounding like fiction. Love was supposed to be unconditional. If you were loyal, patient, steady, if you stayed through the hard parts, it would last. That's what we were shown. That's what we were told to trust. And it made sense at the time. Every movie, every song, every quiet lesson growing up pointed to the same idea. The man who sacrifices, who proves himself through consistency and effort, is the man who gets chosen in the end. So you modeled yourself after that image. You learned to stay calm, to be reliable, to carry the weight without complaint. You thought love was something you stabilized, something you protected by being good and predictable. That belief shaped how you showed up without you even realizing it. But real attachment doesn't live inside that story. The human mind doesn't bond because something is safe. Safety brings comfort, not desire. The nervous system attaches to what it has to feel, track, respond to. That's why the beginning always feels alive. There's uncertainty, contrast, a sense of movement. Nothing is fully known yet, so everything feels charged. And the moment everything becomes explained, settled, guaranteed, something starts to fade. This is the part nobody prepares you for. Love doesn't decay because you failed. It decays because the story you were living by was never built on how attachment actually works. And once you see that, you stop blaming yourself. You start understanding what really happened. Where men quietly lose desire. This is usually the point where things start slipping, even if nobody names it out loud. You feel the shift before you understand it. She's still there, but not fully. Her energy feels lighter, less anchored. And instead of stepping back to see what's happening, you lean in. You give more. More reassurance, more presence, more explanations. You think love is something you stabilize when it starts to wobble. That's what a good man does, right? I did the same thing. I believed that consistency was the cure. That if I showed enough care, enough clarity, enough emotional effort, it would bring things back to center. But every move I made smoothed out the tension that had once kept the connection alive. I didn't realize I was removing the very friction that made desire possible. I was trying to preserve love without understanding how attachment actually works. Here's the hard truth most men don't hear until it's too late. You don't lose someone because you weren't kind enough. You lose them when you become emotionally legible, predictable, safe in a way that puts the nervous system to sleep. Desire doesn't disappear because you did something wrong. It fades because nothing is happening anymore. No contrast, no movement, no edge. And that's the part that hurts the most. You weren't failing. You were performing exactly the role you were taught to play. But love doesn't respond to being managed or secured. It responds to energy, to polarity, to a presence that isn't trying to hold everything together. When you try to protect love instead of understanding it, you often suffocate it without ever meaning to. What love actually runs on, once you stop taking it personally, you can finally look at love without the noise. Strip away the romance, the promises, the moral weight we put on it, and what's left is something colder, but clearer. Love isn't a vow. It isn't a decision. It's a loop in the brain, a pattern built on anticipation, reward, and emotional movement. The mind doesn't bond because something is guaranteed. It bonds because something keeps it engaged. That's where dopamine comes in. Not the pleasure chemical like people think, but the anticipation chemical. It fires when something feels new, uncertain, just slightly out of reach. That's why attraction doesn't follow logic. The nervous system attaches to what it has to track, what surprises it, what isn't fully solved yet. Consistency feels good, but unpredictability feels alive. And the mind confuses feeling alive with feeling connected. This is why giving more often backfires. When you explain everything, clarify everything, and make yourself fully available, you think you're building intimacy. But what you're really doing is collapsing the mystery that kept her emotionally engaged. You turn yourself into something fully known, fully mapped, fully expected. And once anticipation dies, attachment starts to loosen. Not out of cruelty, out of biology. Love isn't about how much you pour in. It's about whether your presence still creates movement inside the other person, whether something still feels unfinished. When that stops, desire doesn't argue. It just fades. Quietly. Cleanly. And understanding this doesn't make you bitter. It makes you precise. The pattern that always repeats. By now, the pattern should feel uncomfortably familiar. It always starts with intensity. Late nights that stretch without effort. Conversations that feel charged, like anything could happen. You feel seen, chosen, awake. There's friction there, curiosity, a sense of motion. Nothing is settled yet, and that's exactly why it feels alive. In those moments, love doesn't feel like work. It feels like gravity. Then, slowly, something shifts. Not all at once. Nothing dramatic. Replies take longer. The warmth cools just enough for you to notice. You start feeling her pull back, not enough to leave, but enough to create doubt. And before you can name it, there's distance. She says she's confused, or numb, or feeling it the same way. To you, it feels sudden, like the temperature dropped overnight. But it didn't. It faded the same way it always does. This isn't cruelty, and it isn't some flaw in her. It's the nervous system adapting. Anything stable, no matter how good it felt at first, becomes background noise over time. The same song that once gave you chills eventually fades into silence. Emotional security without polarity does the same thing. What once excited her now just reassures her. And reassurance on its own doesn't create desire. This is where men usually turn inward and blame themselves. You assume attraction faded because you weren't enough, so you try harder. You become kinder, more available, more emotionally present. But those moves flatten the dynamic even more. They remove the edge that made the connection breathe. Love doesn't die from tension. It dies from emotional flatness, from the moment nothing is felt strongly anymore. The pattern that always repeats. By now, the pattern should feel uncomfortably familiar. It always starts with intensity. Late nights that stretch without effort. Conversations that feel charged, like anything could happen. You feel seen, chosen, awake. There's friction there, curiosity, a sense of motion. Nothing is settled yet, and that's exactly why it feels alive. In those moments, love doesn't feel like work. It feels like gravity. Then, slowly, something shifts. not all at once. Nothing dramatic. Replies take longer. The warmth cools just enough for you to notice. You start feeling her pull back, not enough to leave, but enough to create doubt. And before you can name it, there's distance. She says she's confused, or numb, or not feeling it the same way. To you, it feels sudden, like the temperature dropped overnight. But it didn't. It faded the same way it always does. This isn't cruelty, and it isn't some flaw in her. It's the nervous system adapting. Anything stable, no matter how good it felt at first, becomes background noise over time. The same song that once gave you chills eventually fades into silence. Emotional security without polarity does the same thing. What once excited her now just reassures her, and reassurance, on its own, doesn't create desire. This is where men usually turn inward and blame themselves. You assume attraction faded because you weren't enough, so you try harder. You become kinder, more available, more emotionally present. But those moves flatten the dynamic even more. They remove the edge that made the connection breathe. Love doesn't die from tension. It dies from emotional flatness. From the moment nothing is felt strongly anymore. The dark contradiction at the center of love. There's a hard contradiction at the center of love that most men feel but don't want to name. The moments that hurt the most are often the ones that bind the deepest. Distance doesn't always kill attachment. Sometimes it sharpens it. You've felt this before. Someone feels almost replaceable when they're close, but the moment they pull away, your mind locks onto them. Thoughts loop. Sleep gets lighter. The connection feels stronger in absence than it ever did in presence. This isn't romance, it's conditioning. The nervous system bonds hardest to emotional spikes, pleasure mixed with uncertainty, closeness mixed with threat. Psychologists call it intermittent reinforcement. You don't attach because the reward is constant. You attach because it isn't. Warmth comes and goes. Attention appears and disappears. And the mind, trying to restore balance, grips tighter instead of letting go. This is the part that makes men uncomfortable, but it matters. The nervous system often mistakes anxiety for passion. A racing heart, restless thoughts, that constant pull. Those sensations get labeled as depth. That's why calm can feel empty after chaos. Why peace can feel boring after volatility. Stability doesn't feel like love when your system has been trained on intensity. Understanding this doesn't mean you chase chaos or create pain. That path only destroys you. It means you finally see the mechanism instead of being trapped inside it. Love doesn't survive because it's calm or dramatic. It survives when there's movement without collapse, when intensity exists without turning into destruction. Once you see this contradiction clearly, a lot of your past makes sense. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. What real, mature love actually is. At some point, love has to be pulled out of fantasy and set back on solid ground. Not the version we were sold, but the one that actually lasts. Real love isn't obsession. Obsession is anxiety dressed up as connection. It isn't dependency either. Dependency is fear pretending to be intimacy. And it's definitely not two people dissolving into each other and calling it unity. That kind of love burns hot and fast, then leaves nothing behind. Mature love is quieter, stronger. It's built on regulated polarity. Two grounded people choosing movement over comfort, edge over collapse. Not chaos, not games, not emotional whiplash. Just enough tension to keep both nervous systems awake. There's closeness, but there's still space. Intimacy, but no fusion. Each person holds their own center, their own weight. And because of that, desire has room to breathe instead of suffocating. This is where the masculine frame matters. You don't chase love. Chasing is a confession of need, and need drains polarity. Instead, you stay present without overextending. You care without overinvesting. You allow space without fearing it. Not because you're detached, but because you're whole. Love becomes a choice, not a lifeline. When a man is centered in himself, his presence carries gravity. He doesn't flatten himself to be accepted, and he doesn't disappear to create mystery. He stands where he is. That steadiness, paired with edge, is what allows love to stay alive without turning toxic. That's the kind of love that doesn't burn you down. It holds. The identity shift that changes everything. This is usually the moment when things finally click, if you're willing to look without flinching. Somewhere along the way, you started leaving yourself. Not all at once. Quietly. You adjusted your edges, softened your truth, explained more than you felt. You told yourself it was maturity, compromise, love. But underneath it, there was fear. Fear of losing the connection. And every time you abandoned a part of yourself to keep someone close, love lost something it needed to stay alive. Here's the shift most men never make. Love is not earned by proving your worth. Worth doesn't come from effort, sacrifice, or emotional labor. Those things don't create attraction. They replace it. What sustains love is inner gravity. A man who is centered, whole, and not negotiating his identity for approval creates a pull without trying. When you collapse yourself into the relationship, polarity disappears. And when polarity disappears, desire follows. Self-containment isn't coldness. It's presence without need, care without collapse. You can be open and still anchored. You can love deeply without losing your center. When you're grounded in who you are, love has something to move around, something to respond to. When you're not, it drifts. Not because the other person is cruel, but because there's no gravity left. This is the hard but freeing truth. Love doesn't stay where it's begged for. It stays where it feels alive, where two people meet without one dissolving to keep the other. Once you understand that, you stop chasing. You start standing. Awakening, clarity, and quiet strength. By the time you reach this point, something inside you is already different. Not louder, not sharper, just clearer. You stop scrambling for answers and start seeing patterns for what they are. You realize that loving harder was never the solution. Effort wasn't missing. Awareness was. And once that awareness settles in, the old confusion loses its grip. You're no longer trying to be chosen. You're learning how to stand. This isn't motivation, and it isn't a set of rules to follow. It's a correction. A quiet recalibration of how you see love, attachment, and yourself inside it. Most men never get here. They stay stuck, giving more, explaining deeper, repeating the same cycle with different faces. But clarity changes the cycle. When you understand what actually governs connection, polarity, presence, inner gravity, you stop fighting yourself. Awakening doesn't arrive with noise. It shows up as stillness. As the moment you stop abandoning yourself to keep love close, you begin to notice when effort replaces attraction, when reassurance replaces desire. You feel the difference between being centered and being needy. And once you see those distinctions, you can't unsee them. From here on, love is no longer something you chase or fear losing. It becomes something you meet, calmly, fully, without collapsing or withholding. You don't need promises or theatrics, just truth, held steady. That's the strength that remains when the storm passes. And that's where real love has room to stay.